The old man's house sat at the edge of town, a leaning frame of sun-bleached boards, a rocking chair out front that never seemed to stop moving, even when no wind stirred. Dust hung in the late afternoon light, turning gold when the sun slipped behind the ridge, and that's where she was, Anna May, pouring warm water into a tin basin, wiping the old man's hands clean with a patience that only came from love or guilt. "Don't you worry, Mr. Holloway," she whispered. "We'll get you sitting outside again come morning. You just need rest." The old man's cloudy eyes lifted. "You sound just like her," he murmured, his voice dry as fence wood. "My Ruth used to talk like that, always certain the world was fixable if you just tried hard enough." Anna smiled faintly, but her eyes dropped. Maybe she was right. He chuckled, a sound caught between a laugh and a cough. Or maybe she just hadn't lived long enough to see how much breaks. The clock ticked in the stillness. The prairie wind breathed through the window, carrying the far-off sound of a freight wagon rolling through town. It was another ordinary evening in the last house before the open plains. Ordinary, until that night changed everything, because the next sound wasn't a wagon. It was the creak of boots on the porch. Anna turned, startled. Mr. Holloway's hand twitched on the blanket. "Expecting someone?" she asked. He didn't answer. He just stared toward the door like he'd been waiting for this moment longer than she'd been alive. A knock. Firm. Practiced and not patient, Anna hesitated, drying her hands on her apron before opening the door. Standing there was a man in a fine black coat, dusted from travel but clean-cut beneath it. His face was young but hard around the edges, like someone who had learned how to hide softness because the world didn't reward it. A lawyer's briefcase hung from his hand. Behind him, a black carriage waited by the gate. "Evenin'," Anna said carefully. He tipped his hat, though it seemed more out of habit than respect. "Evening, ma'am. Name's Samuel Holloway. I believe you've been caring for my grandfather." Anna blinked, caught off guard. "You his grandson?" "That's right." His eyes slid past her to the frail figure in the chair. "Been a long time, hasn't it, Granddad?" The old man's lips moved, thin and trembling. "Didn't think you'd ever bother to come back." Samuel's smile was tight. "Well, times change. Circumstances, too." The lawyer behind him, a slick man with a city face and boots too polished for real dirt, stepped forward, unfolding a few papers. "Mr. Holloway," he said smoothly, "if you're well enough, we'd like to go over some matters of estate. Your health has been precarious." Anna frowned. "He's not strong enough for—" Samuel's gaze cut to her. "And you are?" His tone wasn't cruel, but it carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. "You're the nurse, right?" She swallowed. "No, sir. I'm just a neighbor. Been helping out. He don't have nobody else." Samuel studied her, eyes narrowing slightly. There was something calculating behind his polite expression. The way he measured her, the house, even the plate of soup on the table. "You've been kind," he said finally, stepping inside without asking. "But we'll take it from here." The old man stirred. "Leave her be, Sam. Girl's been better company than blood." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I'm sure she has." For the first time, Anna felt a chill creep through the room. The old house, always filled with quiet comfort, suddenly seemed smaller and the air heavier. The lawyer laid papers on the table, his voice smooth and clinical as he spoke of wills and signatures, of power of attorney and ownership of land. Anna tried to listen, but every word sounded like a nail in the coffin of something gentle. The old man's eyes flicked toward her, pleading silently. She reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder, and for a heartbeat that small gesture felt like defiance. Samuel noticed. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "my grandfather's affairs are family business. You've done your part. You should head home now." She met his gaze. "With respect, sir, I don't leave until he's settled." A long pause stretched between them, city sharpness against small-town resolve. Then Samuel smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You've got spirit. I'll give you that." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "But you'd best remember, good intentions have a way of turning costly when money's involved." Outside, the wind picked up. The prairie grasses bent low beneath the darkening sky, whispering the kind of warning that only hearts, not ears, I could hear. And in that moment, Anna May realized something she couldn't yet name. This wasn't a family reunion, it was a takeover. Morning came cold and pale, the kind of gray that made the world look half asleep. Anna May stood by the stove stirring oatmeal that had gone thick from sitting too long. The old man hadn't eaten since the night before. Samuel and the lawyer had stayed, taking the spare room without asking. She'd heard them talking through the thin walls. Low voices. Words like transfer, liquidate, as soon as possible. Words that didn't belong in this house. When she brought the tray to Mr. Holloway's room, he was already awake, staring out the window toward the line of cottonwoods that marked his land. His land. The one he'd built with his own 2 hands before time and sickness took their due. "Morning, Mr. Holloway," she said softly. He looked at her, eyes dim but steady. "You ever watch something you love get smaller every year, till you can't remember when it was big?" She smiled sadly. "I've seen that happen to folks." He nodded toward the window. "That pasture out there used to run cattle clear to the creek. Now the bank says I owe on what's left. Sam says he's going to fix it, but I know what fixin' means in his tongue." Anna set the tray down. "He's your kin. Maybe he just wants to help." "Maybe," he said, "but when help comes wearing polished boots and a lawyer's smile, it ain't always help." Before she could answer, footsteps echoed down the hall. Samuel appeared in the doorway, crisp and composed, the city still clinging to his every word. "Morning," he said, glancing at the untouched oatmeal. "He's not eating again?" "I was trying," Anna replied. Samuel sighed. "You've done more than enough, Miss May. But my grandfather's care is under my authority now. I'll make arrangements for proper staff, medical staff." Her stomach tightened. "You mean to send him away? To a facility in Wichita? He'll get better treatment there than in this drafty old shack." The old man's hand gripped the blanket. "You'll do no such thing. Grandfather." I said no. His voice cracked, but it carried the weight of years. "You think I want to die looking at plaster walls and strangers' faces? This is my home." Samuel's jaw hardened. "Home doesn't mean much when the bank takes it, does it?" Anna stepped forward before she could stop herself. "He still owns this house, doesn't he?" The lawyer's voice cut in from the hall, cool and rehearsed. "Not for long, miss. Papers are nearly finalized. Mr. Holloway's signature will transfer the deed to his grandson's trust." Anna's pulse jumped. "Does he even understand what he's signing?" Samuel turned on her, voice sharp now. "I'd be careful with that tone." She didn't flinch. "You're taking advantage of him. You show up after years, bring a lawyer, and start talking about deeds before he's even finished breakfast." For a moment, the room was silent except for the slow tick of the mantel clock. Samuel's face didn't move, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "You think you know this family?" He said quietly. "You think your kindness gives you a right to question blood?" "I think decency does," Anna shot back. The old man coughed weakly, his hand trembling as he reached for her. "Anna, please." She turned, softening. "It's all right. I'm not going anywhere." Samuel's voice lowered, each word clipped and deliberate. "You are. By sundown." He turned and left before she could answer, his lawyer trailing behind like a shadow. Anna stood there, heart pounding, trying to understand what she'd just done. Standing up to a Holloway, especially one with money, was a good way to end up without work, without friends, and maybe without a roof. But when she looked down at the frail man in the bed, his fingers trembling around the spoon she'd set beside him, she knew there wasn't a choice worth calling a choice. She pulled the chair closer and said quietly, "I'll stay till they make me leave." Outside, a wagon rolled by, its wheels crunching over frozen dirt. The sound carried through the window like a clock ticking down the hours she had left. And though she didn't know what would happen when sundown came, Anna May knew one thing for certain. She wasn't done fighting for him. In town, they'd call her foolish. In the saloon, they'd whisper that she was meddling in business that wasn't hers. But decency, she thought, was a kind of stubbornness too. As she spooned the oatmeal back onto his plate, the old man's eyes glistened. "You shouldn't cross him, girl. He's his father's son. All charm up front, all blade behind." "I've faced worse," she said, though her voice trembled just enough to betray the lie. Outside, the light shifted, colder, sharper. The day had only just begun, and already she could feel the noose of power tightening around the house. By sundown, Lines would be drawn between kindness and greed, love and law. And one woman's quiet act of care was about to turn into a kind of war. By noon, the air had gone still, the kind of heavy quiet that comes before a storm. Dust hovered in the sunlight, suspended like the world itself was holding its breath. Anna May stood by the window, wiping her hands on her apron, watching two men in town clothes unload wooden crates from the black carriage. The lawyer directed them with quick gestures, his hat pulled low. Samuel wasn't in sight, but she could feel him nearby, like the scent of smoke before fire. Inside, the old man had drifted back to sleep, his breathing thin but steady. She pulled the blanket up around his shoulders and glanced again toward the yard. That's when she saw Samuel, standing by the barn, talking with the sheriff. The sight twisted something deep in her stomach. The sheriff, old Porter Briggs, was a man who didn't like trouble, which meant he often stood beside whoever paid his bills fastest. Anna slipped outside, the chill biting through her sleeves. The prairie smelled of frost and old hay. She walked slowly, trying to listen without drawing notice. Needs to be removed before nightfall, she heard Samuel saying. She's got no right to be here. Porter's voice came rough and uncertain. Anna May's a good girl. Whole town's seen her look after the old man. You sure he wants her gone? Samuel's answer was smooth as oil. My grandfather isn't of sound mind. I'm acting on his behalf and legally. Still, the sheriff said, scratching his neck. Ain't right tossing a woman out in this cold. Samuel's tone sharpened. Sheriff, I'll make a donation to your department. Enough to cover new stables. You've been asking for that, haven't you? The pause that followed was longer than it should have been. Anna's heart sank. She turned back toward the house quietly, each step sinking into the frozen ground like a secret she wished she could bury. Inside, Mr. Holloway was awake again. His eyes opened as she shut the door softly behind her. What did they say? He asked, voice no more than a rasp. They're bringing the law into it, she said, kneeling beside him. They mean to take you out of here, and me with it. He stared at her, the fight flickering weakly behind his gaze. They can't make you go if you stay quiet, if you hide till they leave. She shook her head. I'm not hiding from him. I won't let them move you, he gave a thin smile. You've got my Ruth's fire, that's for sure. She once threw a banker out by his collar for trying to seize a horse that wasn't his. Got herself near arrested for it, too. Anna smiled faintly but said nothing. The afternoon stretched long. She made him tea, though he barely touched it. The shadows grew longer across the floorboards. She could hear men's voices outside, hammering something onto a stake. When she stepped out again, she saw it, a notice nailed to the post by the gate. Notice of transfer of property. Holloway estate below it. A signature in ink, Samuel Holloway. The date was that very day. She stood there staring, her breath fogging in the cold. The world around her seemed to slow, the barn creaking in the wind, the long grass whispering low. Behind her, the front door creaked open. You can fight it, Samuel said, his voice calm as a sermon. But it won't matter. The court'll side with me. This house, this land, it's all mine now. Anna turned, her jaw tight. You took his signature when he wasn't even conscious, didn't you? He didn't answer, but his eyes said enough. You think money can make up for that? She whispered. Samuel's expression flickered. Not guilt, not pride, just weariness. Like someone who'd already convinced himself that right and wrong were luxuries of the poor. You don't understand, he said softly. This land's debt is drowning us. The property's worth more soul than sentimental. I'm doing what has to be done. What has to be done, she repeated, voice trembling. Or what's easiest. The silence between them stretched taut, snapping only when the sheriff's horse clopped into the yard. Porter dismounted, hat in hand, eyes low. Miss May, he said quietly, I'm sorry. The papers are in order. You'll have to leave by sundown. Anna looked from him to Samuel, then back again. And where do you think he's supposed to go? He can barely stand. We'll send a wagon for him tomorrow, Samuel replied. He'll be taken care of. Taken care of, she echoed bitterly. That what you call it now? Samuel didn't reply. The wind rose suddenly, carrying a dry tumbleweed across the yard. It bounced off the post with the notice nailed to it, spinning away down the road like something wild refusing to be owned. Anna looked at the sheriff, at the man who once shared meals with her father, who'd watched her grow up, You know this isn't right, Porter. His eyes wavered. Maybe not. But it's legal, she turned back to Samuel. Then law ain't worth much out here, is it? He exhaled long and slow. You can leave on your own or I can have you escorted. Either way, you're done here. And then he walked away, his shadow stretching across the frost-bitten ground like a black crack through everything she still believed in. That night, as the light bled out across the plains, Anna May packed what little she had into a worn satchel. But her eyes never left the window, never stopped watching that frail figure in the chair, the man she refused to abandon. Something in her had shifted. If decency was stubbornness, then kindness was rebellion, and before this was over, both would be tested against men who mistook law for justice. The night sank deep and cold, a quiet the prairie had not known in years. Inside the Holloway house, a single oil lamp burned low, throwing long shadows that trembled on the walls. The lawyer was gone, the sheriff too. Only Samuel remained, pacing near the hearth, staring into the fire like it might give him peace. Anna May sat across from him, her coat still on, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee she didn't drink. The old man was asleep again in the back room, his breath rattling through the floorboards like the ticking of an old clock running out of time. Neither spoke for a while. The fire popped. The wind pressed against the windows, sighing like something restless in the dark. Finally, Samuel said, "You're still here." I said I'd stay until he was settled. His jaw flexed. "He'll be moved in the morning." "You said that before," she replied. "But I don't see a wagon. Just talk." He turned sharply, the lamplight catching his face. Tired, hollow, more human than he wanted her to see. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "He's not your kin. You owe him nothing." Anna met his gaze. "He's old, alone, and decent." "That's enough," Samuel scoffed softly, rubbing his temple. "Decent doesn't keep you alive in this world, Miss May. It never did." She studied him quietly. "Maybe that's why men like you are so afraid of people who still believe in it." That hit something in him. He turned away, staring into the fire again. For the first time, she saw more than arrogance in his eyes. She saw exhaustion. Years of running from something heavier than money or reputation. "My father left nothing but debts," he said finally. "When he died, I inherited the shame and the bills. I built everything I have by cleaning up his messes, paying off what he owed one lie at a time. This land should have been a blessing, not a burden, but all I ever saw of it was what it cost us." Anna's voice softened. "And your grandfather?" Samuel hesitated. "He reminded me too much of him. Same pride, same stubborn silence. I stayed away because I didn't want to hate him too." She leaned forward slightly. "But he never stopped waiting for you. Every day he asked about you, even when he couldn't remember his own name. You were still the boy he raised, the one he said used to mend fences with his bare hands just to make him proud." The words landed heavier than she expected. His eyes flicked up, wet at the corners. "You think it's that simple?" he asked quietly. "I think," she said, "sometimes what breaks between family ain't meant to be repaired with papers or deeds. Just words. Just being there." He looked at her a long moment, the kind of silence that makes a man confront himself. The firelight painted lines of gold across his face, catching the faint tremor of his hands. Then from the back room came a sound, a weak voice calling out, confused and afraid. Samuel froze. Anna stood first, moving quickly down the hall. She found Mr. Holloway half awake, gasping for air, eyes wide and lost. "Ruth," he whispered. "Is that you?" Anna knelt beside him, taking his hand. "It's Anna, Mr. Holloway. You're all right. Just breathe." He looked past her and at the doorway where Samuel now stood, still as stone. "Sam," the old man rasped. "That you, boy?" Samuel stepped inside, each movement uncertain, like a man crossing a river on cracking ice. "I'm here," he said softly. The old man blinked, his eyes clearing for a fleeting moment. "You got your father's eyes," he whispered. "Same trouble behind him. But you ain't him. Don't you go thinking you are." Samuel swallowed hard. "Granddad, I came to make things right. To take care of you." The old man coughed, shaking his head. "Taking care of me don't mean taking what's mine. I raised you to know the difference. He reached out, hand trembling, resting it on Samuel's arm. This land ain't just dirt and wood. It's people. It's kindness. Don't trade it for a number on a paper. Samuel's face broke, just slightly, but enough for Anna to see the child buried beneath the man he'd become. "Granddad," he whispered. "I didn't mean to—" But the old man was already drifting again, his words fading into soft breaths. Anna stood quietly beside the bed. Samuel remained there a long while, staring down at the man who had once carried him on his shoulders through this same house. When he finally turned toward Anna, his voice was hoarse. "You think it's too late to undo something like this?" She looked at him, really looked, and said softly, "Not if you're still asking." Outside, the wind had died. The prairie stretched silver under a rising moon, quiet and still, as if listening for the sound of forgiveness. For the first time since she'd met him, Samuel Holloway didn't look like a man who'd won anything. He looked like a man realizing how much he'd lost before he even began. Dawn came pale and trembling over the horizon, bleeding soft gold across the plains. The light crept slow through the crooked windows of the Holloway house, touching the worn floorboards, the chair by the hearth, and finally the old man's bed. Anna May sat beside him, half asleep in the same chair she'd used for weeks. The lamp had burned out hours ago and the room smelled faintly of smoke and medicine. Samuel stood by the window, coat folded over his arm. He hadn't slept either. His hair was uncombed, his eyes red, but there was a steadiness to him now, a quietness that hadn't been there before. The old man stirred, voice barely above a whisper. "You still here, boy?" Samuel turned. "I'm here." A weak smile crossed the old man's lips. "Good. I thought maybe I dreamed it. You coming home?" He reached for Samuel's hand, his own paper thin. "You remember what I told you when you were just a lad? A man's worth ain't what he builds or buys. It's what he leaves behind that still breathes when he's gone." Samuel nodded slowly, his throat too tight for words. Anna stood, adjusting the blanket. "He should rest," she said softly. But Mr. Holloway wasn't done. His cloudy eyes turned toward her. "Don't let him run from himself, Anna. He's good deep down. He just forgot where that part of him lived." She smiled faintly. "I'll remind him." The old man's breathing steadied again. Within minutes he was asleep, peaceful this time, his face soft like a child's. Samuel sat at the edge of the bed, shoulders heavy with a silence that only truth can bring. "He'll forgive me," he said, not as a question but as a hope. Anna looked at him. "He already has." Outside, a team of horses approached, the same carriage from yesterday, the lawyer stepping down with a ledger under his arm. He knocked on the open door like a man who already believed he owned the place. "Mr. Holloway," he called. "I've brought the final documents." Samuel's voice cut through the air, firm and clear. "You can take those papers back to Wichita." The lawyer blinked. "Sir?" "I said," Samuel repeated, stepping out onto the porch. "You can burn them, file them, or eat them for all I care. This land stays with my grandfather." The lawyer's polished smile faltered. "But sir, the transfer was signed under false pretense," Samuel said. "And I've got a witness who'll say so." He nodded toward Anna, who appeared behind him, standing tall in the doorway. The man sputtered, straightening his tie. "That's highly irregular." "Maybe," Samuel said, voice quiet but hard as stone. "But out here, what's right still matters more than what's regular." The lawyer hesitated, realizing he was facing a different man than the one who'd brought him out here. He tipped his hat stiffly.
"Very well, I'll—"
"Make note of your decision." "Do that," Samuel said. The lawyer climbed back into the carriage and rode off, dust curling in his wake. For a long time, Samuel stood there watching the road fade into the distance. Then he turned to Anna. "You'll stay, won't you? At least till he's stronger?" She smiled faintly. "I'll stay as long as he needs." He nodded, then looked out over the land again, the same hills he'd once dismissed as worthless. In the early light, they looked different now, full of life, of memory, of his grandfather's laughter echoing through them like wind in tall grass. "You ever think about how people change?" he asked quietly. Anna stepped beside him. "Not change," she said. "Remember, deep down we're just finding our way back to who we were supposed to be." He smiled a little, eyes still on the sunrise. You sound like him. Maybe he's just rubbed off on me. The silence that followed was warm, easy, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Behind them, Mr. Holloway stirred again, his voice faint but certain. Sam? Samuel turned. Yes, Granddad? I reckon the fences out back could use mendin'. You up for it? A laugh broke through Samuel's tight chest, the first in years. Yes, sir. I reckon I am. The old man smiled and drifted back to sleep. Anna walked to the table, picking up a cup of cold coffee and handing it to Samuel. You should eat something. You've got a long day ahead. He took the cup, his fingers brushing hers in a small unspoken thank you. I don't know what I'd have done if you hadn't been here, he said quietly. You'd have done the right thing, she answered. Just maybe a little later. He chuckled, glancing down. Maybe so. The morning light poured in, brighter now, cutting through the chill. Dust motes danced like sparks in the air. Outside, the first birds began to sing. The house, once heavy with fear, now breathed again, slower, lighter, alive. Samuel stepped out onto the porch, looking over the pasture that had cost him so much to finally understand. The sky stretched wide and endless above it, full of second chances. Behind him, Anna began humming softly while she folded the blankets. A quiet tune, old and familiar, one his grandmother used to sing. And for the first time since boyhood, Samuel Holloway let the sound of it wash over him. Gentle, forgiving, and entirely enough.